My name is Elara, and I was just 23 when the waves swallowed my world, leaving me adrift in a nightmare I'm still struggling to escape. It began, as all good horrors do, with a quiet desperation and the seemingly benevolent promise of healing. They called it the Sea Breeze Sanatorium, perched precariously on a cliff overlooking the relentless North Atlantic. They said the ocean air, the rhythmic crash of the waves, would soothe restless minds. What they didn't mention was the chilling lullaby that came with it, a melody sung not by the wind, but by something far more ancient and terrifying. I arrived at Seabreeze Sanatorium the day after a particularly violent storm had sculpted the coastline anew, leaving jagged rock formations exposed like broken teeth. My room, number 13, offered a panoramic view of the churning gray ocean. The sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs was constant, a white noise machine of immense power. Initially, it was calming, a steady pulse against the frantic drum of my anxiety. Dr. Albright, a man whose eyes held a weary kindness, assured me that many patients found solace in the ocean's rhythm. He spoke of the thalassotherapy, the healing power of the sea. Dinner was a quiet affair, a mix of hushed murmurs and the distant cries of gulls. The other patients seemed to exist in their own private worlds, some staring blankly, others muttering to themselves. I kept to myself, drawn to the window, watching the endless dance of the waves. It started subtly, a faint, high-pitched keening that would weave itself into the roar of the ocean at night. At first, I dismissed it as wind, or perhaps the strange acoustics of the old building. But then it began to take on a distinct pattern, a melody almost. It wasn't a human voice, not exactly, but something impossibly ancient, like a whale song stretched thin and mournful. It was a lullaby, chillingly beautiful, that promised to carry you away. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, body rigid, convinced I had heard it. My roommate, a frail woman named Mrs. Gable, who perpetually knitted even in her sleep, never seemed to notice. I'd try to explain it to Dr. Albright during our sessions, but he'd nod empathetically, suggesting it was a manifestation of my anxieties, an auditory hallucination brought on by stress. He upped my dosage, but the lullaby persisted, growing clearer, more insistent. One night, the moon was full, casting a ghostly silver path across the water. The lullaby was so vivid it felt like it was playing inside my skull. I couldn't resist. I slipped out of my room, past the slumbering night nurses, and down the echoing corridors, drawn by an irresistible pull towards the common room, which had the largest windows overlooking the sea. As I neared, I heard it, not just the keening, but a chorus. Other patients were there, standing by the windows, their faces lit by the moonlight, their eyes wide and unfocused. They weren't murmuring, they were swaying, a slow, ethereal dance, their lips moving as if in silent rapture. They were humming along to the melody, a haunting, wordless echo of the deep sound. Dr. Albright was among them, his back to me, swaying with the rest. His hand was pressed to the cold glass, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. As I watched in horror, the sound reached a crescendo, a wave of pure, otherworldly music that washed over me, threatening to pull me into its hypnotic embrace. I clamped my hands over my ears, fighting the urge to join them, fighting the overwhelming desire to listen. Then, one by one, the patients, including Dr. Albright, began to lift their arms, not in a human gesture but with a fluid, serpentine grace, their fingers splayed as if reaching for something beyond the glass. Their forms seemed to shimmer, their outlines blurring in the moonlight. I gasped, a cold dread seizing me. The shimmering intensified, and through the distortion I saw not human skin, but something scaled and glistening. Their eyes, once human, now glowed with an eerie phosphorescent light. They weren't patients in a sanatorium. They were something else. Something that blended seamlessly with the ocean. Something that had been waiting. And the lullaby wasn't a hallucination or a manifestation of my madness. It was a siren song, pulling them home. As their bodies dissolved into iridescent mist, slipping through the glass and into the tumultuous waves below, their chorus echoing back to me, I finally understood. The Seabreeze Sanatorium wasn't a place for healing. It was a holding tank, a temporary reprieve for creatures of the deep who sometimes forgot their true nature, lulled into a human form by the ocean's profound, ancient magic. And I, Elara, the restless mind, had simply been a new addition to their choir, their next convert. I'm Finn, 29 years old, and before that place, I'd considered myself a skeptic, a man of logic and reason. But the Northwood Asylum, nestled amongst the whispering pines and overlooking the crashing, unforgiving waves of the northern coast, shattered that belief system. It was supposed to be a refuge from the crushing grief, a place for me to mend after losing everything. Instead, it became a theater for a perverse kind of compassion, where the unseen held a mirror to my deepest fears, reflecting something far more monstrous than I could have imagined. My admission to Northwood was mercifully quick. My family, weary from my catatonic state, had finally given in to the doctor's recommendation. The asylum, despite its imposing stone facade, felt surprisingly cozy inside, almost like an old country manor. My room was simple, a bed, a dresser, and a small window that offered a sliver of the angry ocean, a constant reminder of the chaos I'd escaped. My admission to Northwood was mercifully quick. My family, weary from my catatonic state, had finally given in to the doctor's recommendation. The asylum, despite its imposing stone facade, felt surprisingly cozy inside, almost like an old country manor. My room was simple, a bed, a dresser, and a small window that offered a sliver of the angry ocean, a constant reminder of the chaos I'd escaped. I spent my days in therapy sessions, trying to unravel the tangled knots of my grief. At night, the asylum came alive with different sounds. The wind howled like a banshee, and the ocean seemed to roar right outside my window. But there was another sound, much fainter, much more concerning, the whimpering. It came from the room next to mine, frequently, usually late at night. It wasn't the cries of anger or madness that occasionally ripped through the silence of the asylum. It was a sound of profound, unrelenting sorrow. I asked Mr. Abernathy about it one morning. He paused, his gaze softening. "Ah, that's Miss Thorne, a very sensitive soul. She doesn't quite adjust. We just try to make her as comfortable as possible." He changed the subject, directing my attention to a particularly stubborn stain on the floor. My curiosity, however, was piqued. I started to observe Miss Thorne's door. It was always closed, but I noticed a narrow slot at the bottom, just wide enough for a hand to slip through. Periodically, I'd see Mr. Abernathy or one of the nurses slide small, wrapped packages or cups of water through it. They never went into the room. One evening, the whimpering was particularly distressing. It sounded like an animal in pain, a small, abandoned thing. I couldn't take it anymore. When the night nurse was making her rounds, I seized my chance. As she walked past, I feigned a coughing fit, grabbing her attention. While she was distracted, I slipped out of my room and crept towards Miss Thorne's door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knelt, peering through the keyhole. It was too dark to make out anything clearly, but I could smell it, a cloying, metallic scent beneath the antiseptic. And then I heard it, closer now, the distinct sound of something gnawing. I knocked softly. The whimpering stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was more terrifying than any sound. I whispered, "Miss Thorne, are you all right?" There was no reply, just a low, guttural growl that made the hair on my arms stand on end. I scrambled back, my mind racing. What was in that room? The next morning, I confronted Mr. Abernathy. "What's in Miss Thorne's room?" I demanded, my voice trembling. I heard a growl. It wasn't human. His kind eyes hardened. "Finnegan," he said, his voice unusually stern, "you are in a place of healing. Curiosity can be detrimental. Leave some things to their own devices." But I couldn't. The sounds grew more frequent, more desperate, and I started noticing something else. The staff, after delivering their mysterious packages to Miss Thorne, would often emerge looking paler, a grim set to their mouths. One night, desperation spurred me to action. I managed to acquire a spare key from a distracted orderly, a small act of rebellion for the woman I believed was being tortured inside that room. The whimpering was at its most intense as I unlocked the door, my hand shaking so violently I nearly dropped the key. The room was completely devoid of furniture, save for a single, stained mattress in the corner. The metallic smell was overwhelming now, and in the center of the room, not a woman, but a creature. It was malformed, vaguely humanoid, but twisted and emaciated, its skin slick and mottled, its limbs unnaturally long and jointed. It gnawed on something red and raw in its hands, its eyes deep-set and black, meeting mine with an intelligence that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't whimpering. It was purring. And on the mattress, where a human should have been, lay a desiccated, shriveled husk, barely recognizable as a body. The compassionate custodian wasn't caring for a patient. He was enabling a symbiotic relationship. Miss Thorne was what was left of the creature's latest host, her body a dried-up husk, her consciousness absorbed or devoured. The whimpering I heard wasn't pain. It was the soft, satisfied gurgle of the creature as it fed. Mr. Abernathy and the entire staff weren't trying to heal Miss Thorne. They were feeding the parasitic entity that had taken her over, keeping it alive, perhaps for their own dark purposes, perhaps fearing what it would do if left to its own devices. They weren't healing minds, they were cultivating a monstrous appetite. And my curiosity, my compassion had just opened the door to a new, fresh meal. My name is Clara, and at 33, I thought I had weathered every storm life could throw at me. But nothing, not the public scandal, not the shattered career, prepared me for the storm that truly raged within the walls of the Saint. Jude's Retreat, located on a desolate bluff where only the relentless crash of the Pacific could be heard. They promised peace, inner reflection, a spiritual cleansing. What I found was a cacophony of echoes, not of the past, but of a present that refused to die, trapped in the very fabric of the old asylum. St. Jude's Retreat felt less like a therapeutic facility and more like a decaying mansion. The salt-laden air had eroded its once grand facade, creating strange wind tunnels and creaking noises that constantly played with your perception. My room was on the 3rd floor, overlooking a particularly rugged stretch of coast. The waves here weren't just a sound. They felt like a living entity, a constant visceral threat. Sister Agnes, the matron, was a stern woman with a perpetually worried frown. She spoke of old energies within the building and encouraged all residents to engage in meditation, to still the internal noise. I found it hard to still my internal noise when the building itself seemed to groan and sigh around me. The most unsettling aspect was the echoes. Not just sound echoes, but residual echoes. Sometimes I'd walk down a hallway and feel a sudden chill, a sense of profound sadness, as if someone had just wept there. Other times I'd hear faint whispers just beyond my hearing, unintelligible, like a radio station struggling for reception. The other residents, mostly quiet and introspective, seemed to accept these phenomena as part of the old energy Sister Agnes spoke of. There was one echo that disturbed me most. It was a child's laughter, bright and joyful, that would sometimes well up from the floorboards of my room. It was always brief, always followed by an abrupt, chilling silence. I'd mentioned it to Sister Agnes. She only sighed, her lips thinning. The past holds many secrets, dear Clara. Focus on your own journey. I started spending my evenings in the abandoned wing of the asylum, the one that Sister Agnes kept locked, claiming it was unsafe. But a loose floorboard in a storage closet allowed access. The air in there was heavy, stagnant, imbued with a sense of lingering despair. Yet, amidst the dust and decay, I noticed something peculiar. Despite years of disuse, a faint, sweet smell, like freshly baked bread, occasionally permeated the air. And sometimes, impossibly, I'd hear the gentle strumming of a piano. One night, the child's laughter was particularly clear from my room. It felt closer than ever, almost as if it was under my bed. I couldn't stand it. I went to the abandoned wing, drawn by the insistent echoes of the piano. I found the old recreation room. Dust motes danced in the moonlight, filtering through the grimy windows. In the corner stood a grand piano, its keys yellowed and chipped. And there, sitting on the bench, facing away from me, was a small figure. It was translucent, shimmering like heat haze, a child. A little girl in an old-fashioned dress. She was meticulously playing a simple, joyful melody, her laughter echoing through the room. My heart ached. She was a ghost, a lingering spirit trapped here. I felt an overwhelming urge to comfort her, to tell her it was okay. I took a step forward. The little girl turned her head slowly. Her eyes, though ethereal, were fixed on me, wide and unblinking. There was no joy in them now, only a profound, silent hunger. And then, the echo of the piano intensified, not joyful, but dissonant, jarring. And the laughter changed. It wasn't a spontaneous burst of childlike glee anymore. It was a practiced, chilling peal that seemed to peel away the layers of sanity. The little girl's laughter wasn't an echo of a past trauma or a lingering spirit seeking release. It was a performance, a carefully constructed illusion. The piano, the baked bread smell, the sweet laughter, they were all lures. The St. Jude's Retreat wasn't a place of spiritual cleansing. It was a sophisticated hunting ground for an advanced, empathetic, mimetic entity. The echoes weren't residual energy. They were sophisticated projections, designed to evoke empathy, curiosity, to draw you in. The small, childlike form was merely its most effective bait. This entity fed not on fear, but on your rawest emotions, your sorrow, your compassion, your desperate need to connect. It consumed the very essence of human feeling, leaving behind only the husks of emotional emptiness. Sister Agnes wasn't the matron. She was merely another one of the entity's long-term residents, her perpetually worried frown a reflection of her own emotional exhaustion, constantly providing new victims for the creature's insatiable appetite in exchange for an illusion of fragile peace. And now, Clara, with her own well of profound sorrow, was its latest, most delectable target. The echo in the walls was not the past. It was your own despair, amplified and hungrily consumed in the present.